Dismantling Contemporary Deficit Thinking, Educational Thought and Practice by Richard R. Valencia. A review by Christina Allen-Roach, Mike Massa, Katie Niemeier, and Stacey Rainbolt.
Valencia begins his text with an opening piece on school failure. He defines school failure as the persistently, pervasively, and disproportionately low academic achievement among a substantial proportion of low socioeconomic students of color. Valencia references a case in point with Roland Drake's 1927 comparative study of the mentality and achievement of Mexican and white children in Tucson, Arizona, along with other publications of his own, all of which present a strong argument on the connection between schooling conditions and schooling outcomes. Valencia spends time in the text describing theoretical perspectives on school failure based on research from scholars. First, there's a mismatch between school culture and home culture regarding communication. The example Valencia gives is mom's communication may sound different than the communication at school and could potentially lead to learning problems. The caste theory asserts involuntary minorities resent the loss of former freedoms and perceive current barriers against them as undeserved oppression. Social reproduction refers to structural or systemic inequalities. Deficit thinking is a main point of discourse throughout the text. This theory is explained on the next slide. Students fail in school because of their deficiencies or internal deficits related to their genetic makeup, socioeconomic class, their culture or background, and their familial socialization or communication. Valencia describes 6 characteristics of deficit thinking in the early part of his book. First, blame the victim for failure and find ways to fix the student. The second, oppression, speaks to his idea that educational practices and policies, along with social class and racial prejudices, keep economically disadvantaged students of color in their place. Pseudoscience is listed as a characteristic because researchers push their perspective with vague information but claim that it is based on scientific results. Temporal changes refers to concepts that change frequently. Educability refers to how deficit thinkers view the educability of students with color through a sequence of describe, explain, predict, and modify behaviors. Heterodoxy refers to class domination.
Neo-hereditarianism is the resurgence of the belief that genetic inheritance is the primary factor to determine intelligence and behavior independent of environmental influences. This belief system of scientific racism is resurgent throughout history. The Pioneer Fund is a group established as a charity in 1937 that has funded research and promotion of hereditarianism. Much of the research has focused on eugenics and the purity of the white race. This has continued throughout the last several decades. Hereditarianism started in the 1600s. There have been 3 waves of neo-hereditarianism. Wave 1 started in 1954 and ended in 1982 and focused on African Americans. Wave 2 was from 1987 to 1997 and was Latino-based, and Wave 3 was from 2000 to 2008 and was internationally based. Dr. Ruby Payne proclaims herself the leading U.S. expert on mindsets of poverty, middle class, and wealth. She has traveled the country speaking to many different audience groups about these issues. The following inspired Dr. Payne's work at Dehumanizing Poverty. Oscar Lewis, Michael Harrington, Daniel Moynihan, and Ken Ayuleta. All were either neo-hereditarianists or believed strongly in race-based eugenics. There are several problems with the culture of poverty concept. There are conceptual problems, questionable generalizations, failure to consider alternative hypotheses, and failure to consider resilience and strength of the poor. Much of the work of Dr. Payne and others has been considered pseudoscience by modern scholars.
Which students are at risk? Leosa identifies at-risk students for having problems and says they should be a major focus of social concern and public responsibility. These students suffer from diseases, physical handicaps, and intellectual disabilities. They may be antisocial, indigent, abused, or even destitute. Swadner focuses on 3 at-risk frameworks to help shape the definition of at-risk. Medical and public health focuses on prevention, early intervention, and developmental screenings. Child psychology and early education tend to focus on intervention with a child-saving mentality, and social welfare and social policy are shaped by socio-political forces such as social work, economics, political science.
Valencia himself believes that schools are run in such oppressive ways that the schools themselves place students at risk for school failure. Research shows that lower-performing schools have more teachers that are not fully certified, have little or no experience, or are assigned to classes out of their field. Nationwide, there is almost an $1,100 salary gap per teacher between schools with fewest students of color and the students at schools with the most.
The Nation at Risk essay by Terrell E. Bell, U.S. Secretary of Education, began what is called the excellence movements of the 1980s. The essay called for reform based on failing standardized testing scores for a number of students, but especially low SES students. He called for assessing the quality of teaching, comparing U.S. test scores to other nations, reviewing college admission standards, and defining the problems we must face in order to overcome our challenges in education. The 5 new basics, according to Bell, that every student must take in the classroom include history, math, science, English, and computer science. The Nation at Risk also warns that minimum competency tests will soon become the maximum in expectations. Think about our SOLs in Virginia.
The majority of graduates from contemporary teacher education programs in our colleges are white. Sherry Marks's research shows that a form of white racism thinking towards children of color and English language learners is quite prevalent in College of Education, where pre-service teachers learn that those students have a low educability and are difficult to teach. In response, Marks developed a 7-step program designed to confront and change pre-service teaching racism.
Obviously, educators identify a positive relation between parental engagement and a child's educational achievement. Valencia warns that educational leaders should not associate behavior with values. For example, if a parent does not come to school, teachers should not assume that the parent does not value education. Perhaps they work a job that does not coincide with the school schedule, or maybe English is not their first language and aren't comfortable communicating with the school. Teachers must examine their ideological persuasions in order to encourage and maintain equitable classrooms. In addition, content teachers must hold these beliefs about their instructional roles.
When parental engagement increases, student engagement increases. Educational leaders needed to replace parent stereotypes with recognitions of parent strengths. Helping a parent overcome obstacles instead of deficit thinking helps create a better bond with the parents and in turn increases student engagement.
Theo Harris says a good leader works long, hard hours in order to make a school great. A social justice leader becomes intertwined with the community and life of the school. Barriers to social justice include deficit thinking of the status quo, which is the standard blame the victim mentality, marginalization of types of differences where stakeholders have varying degrees of understanding and acceptances of differences, preference for technical leadership, where leaders seldomly recognize or discuss social justice issues, and national and local policies, particularly standards-based movements which are counterproductive to the pressures of social justice.
Valencia lists 4 strategies for enacting social justice leadership. One is increasing student academic achievement, improving the structure of schools, recentering and strengthening staff capacity, and strengthening school culture and community. All these will help create equity among students, parents, and community. At the time this book was written, 72% of all U.S. students were required to pass an exit-level exam in order to graduate high school. With these tests, the leadership is assuming that the higher test scores are indicative of higher achievement. A socially just leader needs to look at differential performance. That's when the passing rates for African Americans and Hispanics are lower than the rates of white students. How are these tests impacting minority students? Test scores need to be just a small part of a whole picture.
Lastly, in closing, educational leaders should consider the following in order to achieve equal access to an optimal learning environment: instilling a sense of competence in all students, building a learning environment focused on effort to encourage all students, project-based learning, making the classroom safe and secure, eliminating discomforts, relevance of the lesson, inspiring hope and learning, and engagement and creativity.
The strengths of Valencia's book include providing a different perspective on multiple researchers' work. He strongly supports his ideas with many sources. In general, the weaknesses include the text serving more as a lit review with no new information. Valencia does not offer specific ways on how to implement his perspective on social justice in school. Some of our group takeaways from the text include considering multiple theorist viewpoints before implementing any idea or practice, continuing to seek ways to implement equal access to learning for all, and the use of multiple forms of data to determine success of learning.